I'm Eleni Jakos and I come to you from Kinshasa. Welcome to Invest DRC as we take an in-depth look at the economy of one of Africa's most complex nations. Now, the Democratic Republic of Congo is Africa's second largest country and potentially one of the world's richest. Now, it spans 2.3 million square kilometers in Central Africa, and that's nearly two-thirds the size of Western Europe. And it boasts huge natural reserves such as diamonds, tin, copper and coltan. But its natural wealth has been both a blessing and a curse. Let's take a look.
The Democratic Republic of Congo, a country where its present lies in parallel with a past of colonialism, slavery and corruption.
The legacy of colonialism in the DRC is very deep indeed. Looking back through Congo's history, there really isn't a moment where it hasn't been the victim of external exploitative forces.
The Congo gained its independence in 1960. Patrice Lumumba became the country's first democratically elected prime minister. A year later, he was assassinated as part of a plot sponsored by the United States and Belgium. In 1965, Joseph Mobutu came to power in a coup.
I think Mobutu's rule had an enormous impact. It's often forgotten that among the very many negative impacts of the Belgian colonial period, they did leave behind them relatively well-developed infrastructure. That persisted really for the first maybe 10 years of Mobutu's rule to the mid-70s. The DRC's economy was relatively buoyant, the mining industry still functioned. It was his Zairenisation, his authenticity program, that began the slide down into the misrule, systematic underinvestment, the crumbling away of all of that infrastructural and organisational base.
In 1997, an alliance of African nations led by Rwanda decided to get rid of Mobutu for protecting individuals responsible for the 1994 genocide. Mobutu fled to Morocco and the Rwandans installed Laurent Kabila as leader. But Kabila was no puppet. In 1998, he ordered Rwandan and Ugandan forces to leave. Rwanda invaded again, and with 9 countries fighting each other on Congolese soil, it was dubbed as Africa's World War. Kabila was assassinated in 2001, and his son Joseph was appointed president at the age of 29. 5 years later, he won the presidency in the DRC's first democratic elections in 40 years. But remnants of this war remain to this day.
I think that DRC is still paying the bill of having been through its own history. We have been through difficult steps in the past, difficult stages, and this is still being heavy on our ability and the position we have to attract investments.
What the Congo needs and the Congolese people need is investment and jobs. The fact that it has vast mineral resources can and should bring that investment in. Will it ever be free from relations with the external world? Well, absolutely not. How can the DRC ensure that that geological scandal, the fact of its vast wealth, doesn't remain a curse? Because I think it has been a curse historically. It'll take a government that is capable and prepared to look after its people. It needs to collect taxes and use those taxes to provide services and get into the virtuous cycle of employment, tax paying, education, service provision that every other state, well, many other states around the world enjoys. It will also take, I think, a reflection on the part of the people seeking to invest in the DRC, that they do so carefully and responsibly and ethically. They pay their taxes and they don't contribute to maintaining the disorder.
In 2013, the economy grew by 8.5% according to the World Bank and is expected to continue as the government aims to hit double digits.
The country is expecting at least a constant level of growth for the next couple of years. But I would say that there are 3 factors that I would like to consider here. First, the country is coming from a low base. For a couple of decades, the country was run by a different regime and went through some cycle of economic crisis. So we're coming from that period. Second, investments on the mining industry itself, infrastructure, and now we're seeing a stronger interest for agriculture. So those 2 group of events have made a difference. And the third factor I would like to come up with here is efforts made at improving governance. It will remain a challenge because the country is coming from very far. But when you're coming from such a low base, small changes can have a significant impact.
Political stability is crucial to the country's success. In recent weeks, protests have rocked the nation's capital over a controversial census bill. President Kabila's supporters claimed a census was required to ensure fair elections, The opposition argued that a census could take up to 3 years to carry out, delaying the elections and enabling Kabila to stay in power. Kabila is constitutionally barred from running for a third term. Calm has since returned to the streets of Kinshasa. This comes after the Congolese parliament approved an amended version of the law that no longer requires a census, but it is this volatility that often deters investors.
It's the most extraordinary country, and I think people would flock to it were its security and stability and logistics in a state to allow them to do so.
After independence, the Democratic Republic of Congo was the second most industrialized country in Africa after South Africa. Now, its current state is precarious. There's a desperate need for reconstruction and also to spread the wealth to the masses. Now, according to the African Development Bank, in 2013, growth was sitting at 8.1%, mostly boosted by commodity prices, which bolstered the mining sector. Currently, 63% of its 70 million population is living in poverty. I caught up with Information Minister Lambert Mende Omalanga to discuss how all citizens can be part of the DRC's success.
When President Kabila called on his people for an election in 2011, he did so based on a program called Revolution of Modernity. We really wanted to transform our country by using the Congo's own resources and own children. We came to the conclusion that we wouldn't be able to meet our goals if we kept the old man inside of us. Our reactions, our culture, our perception on things, we had to change the Congolese man first. Change his perception, the way he sees his state, his government, his neighbors, the country's wealth. The new citizenship program is all about this new spirit. It's not a question of generation. It's about the perception that each and every one of us has to have of the state and the perception of those who control the state should have regarding their citizens. This is so citizens view the state as useful and dedicated. On the other hand, the state has to view the citizen as their boss, people under its protection. This is how we're going to make the citizen pay taxes, obey the law, not out of fear, but out of respect as something that's beneficial to him. The new spirit within both the people and the government is what we call the new citizenship. This is the new relationship between the state and its citizens.
At the moment, we're seeing a lot of skills being imported to conduct various big projects. What is the capability of the education system in terms of producing skilled workers?
We consider basic education as the first tool we can give our people in order to boost development. The percentage of Congolese children who went to school was extremely low, and therefore adults were educated to a level where they were just seen as cannon fodder by those exploiting our country. These people didn't have an understanding of the world. They weren't able to understand their own society because they didn't have the proper tools to do so. Illiteracy doesn't allow you the same observation skills. The first 6 years of education, the most critical phase, should be free for every Congolese child. Wherever he is, the state must provide for him. And then later at some point, even if the limited means families are able to provide secondary education and college. We want every Congolese person to have the chance to become literate. By doing so, he will have the opportunity to be connected so he can understand the world he's in. He will be able to think about how he can change the world in his own capacity, not only for his well-being, but also for his country. This is why we decided to allocate, no matter how limited our funds were, sufficient subsidies to make education free and to build at least 1,000 elementary schools every year with our budget. We've already begun this and built more than 600 schools this year across the country that are ready for use. It gave our citizens a lot of satisfaction. We think this is the most important service we can provide. We provide our population with the most equal and basic right to education. Any Congolese child has access to this service.
Do you think that perceptions towards the DRC have changed?
We know very well why investors have been reluctant to come to the DRC. We've had a very tough decolonization, which was followed by civil wars, even secession. There were times of insecurity, and by definition, capital doesn't like insecurity. The times under dictatorship were fairly stable, but at the same time, a lot of investors saw it as a lawless state where arbitrary laws prevailed with a lack of justice. When we brought an end to the era of dictatorship, we entered a new era of insecurity with the civil wars. At one point, there were 11 foreign armies, among them some were fighting others. But in 2009, from the moment we decided to build a decent national army which was able to operate with the support of the international community, especially the UN, we started to neutralize and eradicate the various sources of insecurity, root out the different armed groups, get rid of external threats, and the situation began to settle across the country. Even if there are sensitive areas near the borders with Rwanda and Uganda, let me remind you that we have 9 borders that we only had problems in, but everywhere else is stable. That brought back stability as well as investors who started to trust the country again.
So in other words, Minister, we'll be able to see growth of 15%. We know that that is the target for 2016.
We're close to double figures. We're getting closer and closer to the 10%. We're confident that within 2 years, not at the same pace, but probably a faster pace. And the president has had a good idea to ask his fellow citizens to sacrifice. He is not the type to sugarcoat things. He doesn't try and lure his people. He demands sacrifices and that everyone should do so, fairly between the different layers of the population in order to produce more wealth, because we can only share what we produce. Through that production, by improving the growth rate, we will improve social matters that are dear to our hearts. We're going to speed up the pace. The secret is to ask our population for more sacrifice and put in more effort. More sweat, more work, that's what we are going to ask our population.
We're going to a short break, and when we come back, we take a look at the DRC's economic prospects with Prime Minister Augustin Matata Ponyo. Stay with us. Welcome back to Invest DRC. As we've seen, the country has had a complex past. In fact, it's still grappling with the legacies of colonialism as well as conflict. But things are starting to change. I caught up with Prime Minister Augustin Matata Ponyo. Let's take a look.
For quite a while now, we see that there are a lot of private operators who want to come and invest in our country, which was not the case a few years ago. Quite simply, it's because economic potential is high. There are several sectors in which private companies can invest: hydrocarbons, oil, electricity, roads, agriculture, mines. It exists as much potential as there is interest. Secondly, the business climate. We work very hard to improve the business climate. The private sector doesn't need nuisances, but it needs things to be easy, and we are working very hard on it. We are fighting to get a better ranking in doing business. As you know, the DRC was classed among the top 10 reformer countries in the world. Our ranking didn't change the way it should have, but I think that's what's important, is that we're on an improvement path in terms of business climate in order to attract more investors to our country. For example, in 2014, around 7,000 companies had been created. That figure is way superior to the previous year, where only about 1,000 creations were registered. The private sector is taking off.
How do you plan to broaden your tax base? Of course, most of the revenue right now is coming through from the mining sector. We know that corporate tax is very high. What are you planning to do to diversify revenues?
The private sector is a driver of growth. The private sector is essential in creating wealth. We firmly believe in that, not because we are economists, but because that is the example given by the richest country in the world. As far as the DRC is concerned, we have to tell you that all reforms we are currently putting in place are designed to promote the private sector, to alleviate taxes for the private sector, allowing it to move forward, to get stronger, to grow its volume of activities. The tax rate is not 40% anymore. It went down to 35%, thanks to the reform that we launched, the value-added tax. This makes the country more attractive for the leaders who want to invest in this country. We've also set out on the Organization for the Harmonization of Business Law in Africa, or OHADA, which makes it possible to appeal to a supranational jurisdiction outside of the DRC. It's an organization following African law, and this allows us to have a jurisdiction giving us the most justice to all the investors who are not dissatisfied by a domestic verdict. Also, the DRC took part in the New York Convention on arbitral sentences. This too makes economic operators who invest in our country feel safer. It is true that we didn't have a significant improvement in the ranking, but you know the improvement of the business climate is not a static verdict, it's a dynamic verdict. The most important is that we work to improve our ranking.
Looking at Grand Inga, this could be a game changer for the country and electrify the entire DRC, if not the entire region. But we know that there's been problems with Inga 1 and 2. It's not operating at full capacity. Are we going to see similar issues? Because this is all about distribution. It's not only about energy generation.
You need to know that the way we manage the Inga project is very different from what happened in the past. Today, professionals lead the Inga project. Pre-feasibility studies have been conducted. Feasibility surveys are being conducted. The mobilization process of private, multilateral, and bilateral partners is led in a professional manner. Today, the Inga project is trying to give a sense of security to all the stakeholders, inside or outside the country. Inga 3 will give more than 4,000 megawatts, half of which will be used for domestic consumption. The other half will provide electric energy to other African economies, especially South Africa, which has already requested it. Nowadays, I think the professional manner in which this project is managed reassures all the stakeholders interested in the realization of this mega project. In all sincerity, I have to tell you that the current energy deficit is a burden for the Congolese economy. It's a heavy burden. The achievement of that project around 2019 to 2020 shall free the energies available to boost the Congolese economy.
You're targeting 15% by 2016. If we don't see private sector involvement, where does that leave the country? Where does that leave growth?
I think the economic growth rate we set is not exaggerated. It's in accordance with the real economic parameters of our country. Economic growth is not aggregation of results obtained in different economic sectors of the country. The mining sector, which contributes up to 30% in the GDP, the agriculture sector, the transportation sector, the business sector, the construction sector. In short, there are different sectors. What we are trying to do today to guarantee this double-figure growth rate is to work on reform, on the improvement of the business climate for the investments in different sectors to become a reality. Because production is the result of investments. It's the result of an improved business climate. It's the result of consumption. So today, when we look at what we are doing in the mining sector, where there are more investments, in the agriculture sector, where there are more investments, in the construction and public work sector, where there are more investments, in the hydrocarbon sector, where there is more exploration, I believe that the result of all this work will boost economic growth. So a double-digit economic growth from this point of view is not an unrealistic goal. It's a dream that can come true.
Right, we're going to a very short break, and when we return, we'll continue our conversation with Prime Minister Matata right after this. Stay with us. Welcome back to Invest DRC, where we take an in-depth look at an economy which is blessed with natural wealth, but also riddled with a turbulent past. Now, the DRC government is targeting GDP growth of 15% by 2016. I continue my conversation with Prime Minister Augustin Matata Ponyo. How is the continued insecurity in the eastern part of the DRC impacting investor sentiment? Is it something that's keeping you up at night? Are you concerned?
We have to be optimistic, madame. I'm optimistic by nature. I believe in positive things. I believe in a better future. And I think that the most important thing today is to look at the country's east with a positive outlook. I think that war is behind us. The Congolese army under the leadership of President Kabila was able to defeat the armed groups, rebellions, the famous M23, and today we are trying to find solutions to secure the east of the country. Our aim is to put an end to the movement of the armed group, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. I think that the trend now is effectively that these movements can leave the eastern Congo once and for all. Plus, you know, madame, securitization is a process. It can't be done with a magic stick. This is not how we establish peace in a part of the country which has been at war several times for several years. Today I think it's positive. There are less rapes, less killings, less problems. But it's a process. I think we should have peace in these regions within a couple of years. I think investors will have to show more interest for this part of the country where it'll be nice to live.
Bloomberg TV Africa has been on the ground in Kinshasa, and we've spoken to various segments of the economy, including small business owners to CEOs. And some of the issues that keep on coming up is transparency of contracts, contracts enforcement, the judiciary system, and of course access to capital. Are these some of the things that you're working on, and what are you doing to change the negatives?
Indeed, the private sector, as I said earlier, is seeking greater simplicity, greater convenience, and as a government, we are working to improve the business climate in which companies operate. That we need more fairness in justice. The economic operators have to feel more confident about the justice and security that we are working on an ensemble of reforms, with the help of AHADA, via the New York Convention, by creating commercial courts, by reforming the mining sector, the hydrocarbon sector. All these reforms we are trying to launch is to promote the boom of the private sector in a more positive environment. Indeed, the private sector, as I said earlier, is seeking greater simplicity, greater convenience, and as a government, we are working to improve the business climate in which companies operate. That we need more fairness in justice. The economic operators have to feel more confident about the justice and security, and we are working on an ensemble of reforms with the help of AHADA, with the New York Convention, by creating commercial courts, by reforming the mining sector, the hydrocarbon sector. All these reforms we are trying to launch is to promote the boom of the private sector in a more positive environment.
China is very important to the DRC. In fact, it's one of your biggest investors. Is there room for more investment from other countries? And which investors are you speaking with right now?
There is room for everyone. For those who come from China, those from Europe, those from Africa, those who come from the US. The DRC offers so much potential and so many opportunities that everyone is welcome to invest in this country. Let me give you an example. The USA, via a mining company, has just invested $2 to $3 billion in the mining sector. That's the biggest investment at the moment. Others are investing in the hydrocarbon sector, others in the electricity sector, others in agriculture, others in infrastructure. Anyone can invest in our country, and we are calling all those who want to invest in our country to do so, to come to this country where the opportunities are countless. There are 70 million people in this country. The demand is high.
There are going to be democratic elections in 2016. That's after the first democratic election was held in 2006. What are you telling investors by way of the political environment and obviously policy continuity?
I think we have to send a positive message to everyone who would like to come and invest in this country, because there are more opportunities in the DRC. The government is working to improve the conditions of life and business, commercial activities, investments. Some will say it's not exactly what we are looking for. Well, come to the DRC and the business climate will get better and better in our country. The government is very, very committed, and all the reforms that we are trying to put in place is aimed at continually improving the business climate. We are inviting investors to come and work in this country because the potential is enormous. Economic growth is vigorous. While in the developed world they have 2 or 3% growth, sometimes 1% in Europe. Well, here we have 10% growth. It means that wealth is created. There is a solvent demand. Therefore, all the investments and production done here can be sold and consumed. We send a positive message to all the investors all over the world to come to the DRC. It's the land of the future, prosperity and perspective.
Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Invest DRC. We'd love to hear from you. You can send us your thoughts on Twitter at Bloomberg TV Afri. You can also take a look at our Facebook page. And if you missed this episode and more, you can catch it online at BloombergTVAfrica.com. From me, Eleni Jokos in Kinshasa, it's goodbye.